I'm so far away from this.
Yeah, it's directional.
Let me see
so
if,
as long as you're kind of pointed at it.
As long as they can hear me, that's the biggest thing. I can use my public speaking voice if necessary. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing to gather, to listen, and to imagine together. My name is Latasha Deloach, and I serve as the Iowa City Senior Center Coordinator for the City of Iowa City, right down the street. And hopefully you'll join us afterwards for the fashion show at 3:30. Lots of food. I need you to come eat it. Thanks. It's truly an honor to welcome you to the Reading the Future. It's part of the Parables of the Future Black Future Fest. It's the first time we've ever done a Black Future Fest, so thank you for partaking. This festival was created with a simple belief. The future is not something we wait for. It's something we practice together across generations, across lived experiences. Octavia Butler understood that deeply. Her work reminds us that change is inevitable. But how we respond, how we adapt, how we care for one another, how we build community is a choice. In her stories, survival is never a solo act. It is relational. It is collective. It is deeply human. This year also marks the 100th anniversary of Black History Month, a century of insisting that Black stories matter, that Black knowledge belongs in public spaces, and that our history is not a footnote, but a foundation. Octavia Butler reminds us that Black history is not only about what we've survived, it is about what we are still becoming. Today is not just about remembering the past. It's about deciding what kind of future we are brave enough to build. Before we begin, I want to offer heartfelt thanks first to our panelists here in the room and joining us over Zoom. Thank you for your time, your insight, and your willingness to share your thinking and your hearts with this community. We are grateful to each of you. Thank you to our partners here at the Iowa City Public Library, Jason, I don't know where Heidi is, and Angela, for opening this space and for believing in the power of public imagination. And thank you to the library for allowing today's program. So thank y'all. To be live streamed and recorded so the people who aren't able to make it can see this later, making this conversation accessible, which is very important to us, to people who couldn't be here. Accessibility is not an add-on, it's a part of how we care for community. And we are honored to have the University of Iowa Special Collections with us here today in the back of the room. Some of you have got a chance to check it out. You'll find first edition and signed works by Octavia Butler, along with Afrofuturist comics and related materials. I encourage you to visit their table if you have it and spend a little time looking at those pieces. They are reminders that ideas travel through hands, through time, and through care. I also want to thank Friends of the Iowa City Senior Center. Their financial support are the ones that are allowing us to have Black Future Fest. Your investment affirms something we hold true. Older adults are not just keepers of history, they are essential architects of the future. And because of the future, we must be intergenerational. I want to lift up what's ahead. Just in case you didn't know, a children's Afrofuturistic mural workshop is later this month, led by Dana Egan. So I think it's on the 22nd of February. So she's the designer of the festival flyer. So if you see the flyer that you came in, she's the designer of that. So it's just a reminder that imagination belongs to all ages. Today's conversation will be guided by someone whose care and clarity make him the perfect steward for this moment. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator, A. Daryl Moten.
Many and diverse are the things that people say about me and my defining traits. Clarity is not among them, so thank you very much for a very, very kind introduction. So with that said, it is incumbent upon me to introduce our panelists for this afternoon. Beginning probably furthest from my left, your right, a professor of journalism and African American studies at the University of Iowa, the author of many things, including an editorial that appeared in the newspaper today, if I'm correct. Also author of Racialism and the Media, Driven, Reflections on Love, Career, and the Pursuit of Happiness, and the Black Superwoman and Mental Health. Power and Pain, Dr. Venise Berry. Next to her, a retired teacher late of the Iowa City School District, representative of perhaps the finest of the Divine Nine, Alpha Kappa Alpha, Ms. Diana Henry. And joining us on Zoom, or as I like to say it, from 2 hours in the future in Portland, Oregon, Professor Walida Imarisha, who is an educator, writer, poet, co-editor of the Octavia's Brood short story collection, among other things, my favorite bad sister, director of Portland State University Center for Black Studies, or as I like to refer to her, everybody's favorite tenured weather goddess. We've known each other for a while. Sorry about that. It's an inside joke. So I guess in beginning, it is important to remember that, that Octavia Butler's work not only brings up issues of the past, but also issues of the present and future. So in fitting with the theme, I'll go ahead and open up a question to the entire panel. How did you first encounter the work of Octavia Butler, and what made it resonate with you personally? And the way I conduct my classes, the way I conduct my classes is don't wait for the translation, don't need to raise your hand, just jump on into the conversation.
Okay. Well, actually, I've known about Octavia Butler for a long time, but actually, this book here is the first time I actually read a book all the way through Octavia Butler. And when I was reading it, it was a kind of a very visceral type of reading. I felt really kind of nauseated as I was reading some of the things that were happening with the slaves, what was happening as far as her description as far as the whippings and all that kind of stuff. It was really gut-wrenching when she describes the whipping. Butler provides vivid pictures of the daily lives of people on the plantation. Even the play of the enslaved children was depicted to show how white supremacy affects the minds of the youth, conditioning them to accept their situation as normal. When Dana saw that, she exclaimed to Kevin, who was or is her husband in the story, that she wanted to go home because this place was a disease. This visceral experience stayed with me. The dialogue is real and compelling.
Yeah, I think my introduction to Octavia Butler came with her Pattern Master series. And as a creative writer myself, and I teach creative writing, the interesting thing about that series to me was how there were layers of activities, of behavior, of information. She took the concept of slavery, and she, on top of that, she put a telepath, an alien kind of immortal telepath who's actually looking for a mate and trying to create a kind of legacy for themselves. And so she took this notion of slavery, which is something we're all familiar with, but she enhanced it to create this other world that's going on in relation to this situation. So he's going all around the world, and he's collecting black people that have these empathetic tendencies or tactics, because he's trying to find a mate, and he's trying to create a legacy. And I just thought that was fascinating. I was like, wow. So we have the idea of slavery and the concerns and the problems and the issues, but at the same time, there's this other thing going on. He's not nearly as abusive to his slaves and that kind of thing. There are some conflicts between the slaves because different factions decide they're going to start fighting each other in order to gain more prominence and more power and stuff. But I just thought it was interesting that she took this basic notion of slavery and just totally turned it inside out. And it was so fascinating to me as a writer that, you know, she was able to do this. One of these days, I'd love to write some science fiction. I haven't done it yet. But my daughter and I are talking about doing a graphic novel about fairies. She likes fairies. So I would do the writing and she would do the illustration. So we're looking at that.
So much first for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I wish I could be there in person, but I actually was born in Iowa, and a huge chunk of my family lives there. So I was like, Black Futures Fest in Iowa. Oh my gosh. So thank you to everyone who made it possible, and thank you so much, Daryl, for inviting me to participate and just pulling us all together. My first introduction to Octavia was actually Kindred as well. I encountered her while I was still in high school. I used to go to a secondhand bookstore, this, just dusty place, and peruse the shelves, and especially the science fiction section. And I absolutely judged books by their cover. I was like, oh, that looks interesting. And so I saw Kindred, and I actually, when you held it up, I think that was the copy I saw with the two Black women's faces on the front. And it stood out to me because I'd never seen a Black woman on a science fiction book before. And I was like, I don't know who Octavia E. Butler is, but she's already one of my favorite writers, and I will read everything she's ever read. And I was not wrong.
Thank you. So, continuing with that thread and understanding that Butler's work in centering not just the Black experience, not just the Black woman experience, but the Black woman experience throughout time, throughout space. When you read Butler's work today, whether it's revisiting something or maybe encountering something that you previously had not explored before. In preparing for this panel, I did a lot of reading, which is why the questions ended up being as robust as they were. Sorry about that. But I reread some of the Panelists series. And so, when we either read things anew or when we revisit things, what do we see in Butler's work that could be that directly maps onto our experiences as readers and as people and as denizens of the past, present, and future today? Do we see it more as a warning? Do we see it as a mirror of our present moment? Or maybe do we see it as a guide towards something better? I think I'll go in reverse order, and we'll start with Professor Marisha.
Yes. I think Octavia's work is always relevant and needed, and I think especially in times of crisis. It's been a time of crisis for 500 years, and it's escalated. Octavia E. Butler always wanted to be a New York Times bestseller list. She didn't hit that when she was alive. But in 2020, her book, Parable of the Sower, reached the New York Times bestseller list for the first time. And I think that is really indicative of what her work gives to people, right? Folks at that time were having, obviously the beginning of the pandemic, which is still very much ongoing. We have, the Black Freedom Summer. There's so many pieces coming together. And I think Octavia's work really helps people to be able to understand that, to explore that, and to hold out hope that something else is better and is possible. I think that's one thing there's so many things I turn to her work for, but I think one of the biggest ones, especially in these times, is the lesson that things can get worse. Things may get worse. Things will get worse unless we change them, but we can always change them. We can always come together imagine something different and build it into existence. So no matter how bad it gets, we always have the power to take us in a different direction.
Thank you.
One of the things that amazes me about her books, about her different stories, is that they were written between, I looked this up, 1976 and 2005. But she does some really interesting predictions in relation to what's going on right now. She talks about droughts, she talks about rising seas, she talks about middle and lower classes that are struggling to make ends meet. She talks about the impact of privatization on our school systems and in our society. And she even talks about, this is interesting, in Parable of the Talents, she has a public figure who claims to be a Christian and is saying, "Make America great again." I think that's fascinating. That's like, wow. You know, she kind of hit it right on the head.
And this was decades before 2000.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Her last book was 2005, and so for her to kind of see these futuristic kind of situations and to tie them into her stories, I think is really exciting. And she actually says, there's one other thing I wrote down when I was reading about her. In an interview, she says, you got to make your own worlds. You've got to write yourself into those worlds. Whether you were a part of the greater society or not, you've got to write yourself in. And I just thought, I just love her writing. I think that she had such a vision that was so important to where we are today and where we're going in the future.
Well, although Kindred is set in the antebellum South, Octavia's biographer, Susanna Morris, considers those novels are what they call speculative fiction, because it represents an impossible scenario and it invites the readers to examine their own assumptions, beliefs, and behaviors regarding slavery and its legacy. The question for the reader is, what would you do if you were in the place during the time of slavery? Slavery was a way to address a classmate's mid-1960s attitude that the older generation should have rebelled more. When she was 13, she said she thought the same. Her friend once said, quote, "I wish I could kill off all of those old people who have been holding us back for so long. But I can't because those people would be my own parents." Young people felt that if older people had more backbone, maybe black people would be further. Octavia, she sympathized, but she disagreed with her friend. She loathed racism and slavery and believed her ancestors were immensely strong. She kept coming back to her friend's pain and ignorance and wondered, what would it take to really survive the crucible of slavery? How could she get others to empathize with the experience of the enslaved, of those who suffered generations later? She wanted the younger generation to understand their ancestors as heroes and survivors, not cowards. She wanted people to reject romantic dreams of revolution in favor of the sober reality of survival. She thought that if people were better educated about slavery, they could be more empathetic, not only about history, but also about their own experiences. In Kindred, the readers explore the exterior lives of the enslaved, providing a mirror to the past, which gives Black people proof of their strength to survive hell.
Very good, very powerful. And on that note, because that community-based strength is something that plays a role in so much of Butler's writing, what are some of the other ways that we see Butler exploring the promises and maybe the limits of community? Open question, sorry.
Well, I think for me, one of the things that she does very effectively is all of her books are about survival. How do we survive whatever we're going through, whatever situation we're in, whatever period we're in? It's about survival. What do we need to do to survive? And I think that, for me, is an important part of the community, because, of course, some of her key takeaways are, adapting, even assimilation, and resisting as well, fighting the good fight. And so for me, when it comes to community, she really takes a broad brush to talk about specifically like relationships. How do relationships impact community? How do relationships connect to our survival? What are some of the elements that we think about in relation to how we connect to each other? I mean, that's a really important part of her work, I think. And the other component, I think, is emotional resonance. Just how do emotions connect us? And why are emotions important to who we are and how we operate in this society? If we don't feel, we feel a certain way about each other, about ourselves, about our situation, about our society, and that emotion actually influences our behavior. And we begin to, if we care, if we understand, if we empathize with other people, then as a community, we have a tendency to better interact and better grow and build and develop and help each other, understand each other. So I think community for her is really about people learning to care about each other, learning to connect to each other, learning to love each other.
Professor Marisha?
Thanks. Whenever you're on Zoom and everyone else is in person, you're like, I don't want to start talking, and then you can't tell someone else.
It's the way of the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think community is the heart of Octavia E. Butler's work. And, I co-edited Octavia's Brood science fiction stories from social justice movements, organizers, activists, change makers, writing sci-fi and speculative fiction. And it's called Octavia's Brood, obviously named for Octavia E. Butler and referencing her book, Lilith's Brood, her trilogy. And I think that it was really important for those of us who have been involved in organizing, in radical activism and in dreaming and liberatory movements, to have her work as a touchstone. So many of the principles and values that I hold dear as someone who's trying to make the world a better place are absolutely present in her work. And I absolutely agree that community is the foundation. The emotional connection is the foundation. I think one of the important lessons from Octavia's work is that there isn't an end goal we're reaching where, okay, now we're free, now we're done, we won, we're like, let's all go to the beach.
There's no finish line.
Yeah, we can go to the beach. But yes, that I always think of the Ursula K. Le Guin quote, which also is someone who resonates with that as well. The ends justify the means, but what if all we have is means, right? So there is no end. So how we make change is the change we're trying to make. And I think Octavia E. Butler's work is very much rooted in that to make change that doesn't just replicate systems of oppression, we have to be different. We have to be different individually, but more we have to treat each other differently. And we have to hold each other's humanity. And that means holding the worst of us as well as the best of us. I think that a lot of times we think of, you know, okay, well, people are going to come in community and they're going to be their best selves. That's not always the case, especially in circumstances where you're experiencing perhaps some of the worst things that have ever happened to you. People are going to be messy. They're going to be rough with each other. And Octavia's work doesn't shy away from that. And I think it makes it challenging sometimes because you're like, oh, why did that character do that? But it's important because when we are under pressure and stress, when we are holding so many different traumas, we don't always treat each other well. And there has to be a way to hold folks accountable, absolutely, to minimize and to, you know, stop harm, but to say that's part of being human. And if we aren't building movements and communities that can hold that, we actually aren't building anything that is sustainable and will take us into that future that we want.
I actually wrote down a thing from one of her books, from Parable of the Sower. One of her characters says something about change that I thought was really dynamic. The character says, all that you touch, you change. Mm-hmm. All that you change, changes you. Mm-hmm. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. Mm-hmm. And I just thought that was so powerful. Mm-hmm. Again, as you're reading her different books, she has all these nuggets, all these elements of truth that really ring. You know, she was writing it in the past, but it rings true today, and it's probably going to still be true, you know, in the future. And so I just think it's really, she's a great author to just dive into and just better understand what she's trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. In Kindred, the character Dana, she's the one who goes back in time, okay? She develops a relationship with Sarah. Sarah is one of the slaves on the plantation. And she develops with Nigel, who is the young boy on the plantation, another slave boy, and Carrie, who is a mute slave girl on the plantation. And Sarah teaches Dana how to cook. And Sarah and Nigel, they provide Dana with guidance on how to navigate on the plantation because, you know, Dana is coming from 1976 and going back into the past. At the same time, some enslaved people punish Liza. Liza is the seamstress on the plantation, but she betrays Dana, and because Dana wound up trying to escape from the plantation, and she tells the overseer and the owner of the plantation, and so the other people in the community on the plantation, we're talking about community on the plantation, they decide to make sure that Liza is punished for betraying Dana. So that's the way that community was formed on the plantation. And others, although the black community persistently is fractured by the sudden removal of members through either calculated strategies or mere whims of the white controllers, that community always patches itself back together, drawing from its common suffering, common anger, and common strength. And that's how they make sure they have community.
That's on that fantastic note, with this a question that has been bubbling in my mind since everyone's been talking on the panel, is the notion of Afrofuturism and how Afrofuturism is both bound by but also connected to tragedy, and how often in the wake of tragedy, our tragedy is, you know, is what in many ways ends up being that foundation and our strength. on that note, important to establishing a proper, a proper Afrofuturist future, or Afrofuturist present, but Afrofuturist future. We see a lot how like family and intergenerational lineage and responsibility to past and future generations, it appears constantly throughout the work, especially Kindred, in which the main character has to be directly responsible for past and future generations. So what feels distinctive about the way Butler approaches these themes as opposed to, say, Ursula Le Guin's The Dispossessed and how future generations, and I'm not asking for any discussion of The Dispossessed, but that's the first thing that came to mind. What feels distinctive about how Butler approaches the theme of intergenerational responsibility? We'll go ahead and start, Ms. Henry, if you wanted to lead off the answer.
Well, Dana is like the main character. She's the one that's going back to try to, subconsciously, Rufus is kind of bringing her back all the time. Dana is transported back to her great-great-grandfather's plantation, where her great-grandmother, Hagar, was born in 1831. And Rufus is frequently endangered. I mean, he's always having some problems, always getting hurt. And in his being hurt, he draws Dana back to the plantation to save him, to get him out of his dangers. However, his lust after Alice, because Alice is one of the free persons on the plantation, as a young man, and he rapes her, resulting in the child Hagar being born. So Hagar is Dana is the descendant of Hagar. And Rufus is encouraged by Dana to free Hagar and her brother, which he does after the tragic death of the mother. Octavia, it merges the narrative of the enslaved person with the verbal and situational echoes to convey the sense of authenticity. That's what she tries to do.
Thank you. Walida?
Yeah, I mean, I think, that the complexity of humanity is something that Octavia E. Butler applies to this intergenerational reality. And I think, I was actually thinking, well, I'm not going to go off on that. I was going to go off on a black time travel rant, maybe
I'm all about tangents and rabbit holes, so by all means, but okay, I trust you.
Well, I mean, Kindred obviously is a time travel book. Dana is from 1976 and is getting pulled back and forth through time. But so many of Octavia's works involve sort of crossing time and blurring that line between past, present, and future, ancestors, the Lilith Brood trilogy. Humans are basically have destroyed themselves and the planet, and the very last of us are saved by aliens. But people are frozen, so they're being unfrozen at different times. So some folks are coming out years later, but they were saved at the same time. So in some ways, they are time traveling, right? For everyone else, they're like, well, we've been here for 10 years and you just got here. And, I could go through her books, but I think that is really important because for me, I think that linear time is a method of social control. I think a fundamental piece of not just Afrofuturism or Black sci-fi, but Black existence is defying linear time, is living non-linearly, that we are connected in not a theoretical way, but a very visceral way to the ancestors. We're also viscerally connected to the future. And I think that we can commune with them and dream with them and build with them. And I think that Octavia's work shows that. So our ancestors are ancestors, but they're also contemporaries, right? And that, I think Kindred, as you said, is a perfect example of that. But the Pattern Master series as well, right? They have long-lived folks, so they're spanning hundreds of years. And so, folks who have been alive for millennia are the parents of people who were just born, right? And that's, I feel like it breaks down the intergenerational barriers and allows us to see those who came before as still with us, and also those came before as human, and flawed and beautiful, just like we are.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that she does very well in all of her stories is really look at how the past ties to the present, ties to the future in relation to characters, in relation to generational characters. One of the things she says is that everything you do has consequences. There's side effects for anything that happens in our world. So we can't say, oh, I'm going to do this, and then that's it. That stops. There's always these other kinds of things that happen as a result of that. And I think that she ties that to her characters, where characters from the past influence and impact characters in the present, influence and impact characters in the future. And, we all understand that as part of who we are. Our ancestors are part of who we are today. And the people in the future will be part of it. We'll be their ancestors, and we will help to create and build and develop and nurture their behavior and their thoughts and their ideas. And so I think the generational connection is very effective and very important in her work.
Slight tangent. One of the things that I did notice that Butler's work with intergenerationality and intergenerational responsibility inspired a lot of speaking of being aware of the present moment, I think Damon Lindelof's Watchmen sequel really cribs a lot from Butler's work in the intergenerationality and the responsibility to them. So while on that note, Butler's stories we often see them centering emotion and empathy, both as a necessity for the plot, but also as a means of transcendence and a means of humanity actually locating the things within themselves to advance themselves, whether it is connecting with different species or leading the way into the future. What do you think that Butler accomplishes by placing these qualities, very distinctively human qualities, in the heart of, as the source of very speculative stories? I'm sorry, Professor Marisha, I'm gonna go back to you on this one, just because I just reread Octavia's Bird the other day, so you're on my mind when this question gets asked.
No, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think it's vitally important, and I think, again, it tells us that what we have control of is ultimately how we treat each other, right? And that, again, to build differently, we have to be different with one another, and that is rooted in the individual, right? I think one of the, powerful principles of Octavia E. Butler's work that my co-editor Adrienne Marie Brown pulls out. She does amazing work, Octavia Butler and Emergent Strategy. She has a book called Emergent Strategy. Everyone go read it. Read everything she's written. She's amazing. But, there are principles of emergent strategy, ways of organizing that are focused on, being in relation with each other, with nature, with the planet, rather than sort of trying to dominate it or control it. And I think, a big one of those is this idea of being fractal, right? That the smallest part represents the largest part. It mirrors the largest part. So we see that in nature, right? Honeycombs are fractal. There are many, many
Snowflakes.
examples of that. Adrian talks about how, we are also in our organizing movements and even just in our communities fractal. How we treat one other person becomes representative of our community. And becomes representative of our movements and the world we're able to build. So if our individual relationships are exploitative, if they are transactional, if they are weak, then ultimately that is going to reflect what we build out of that. So I really, I appreciate that frame that Adrian gives for looking at Butler's work, because it allows us to think about that. If we want to build a different world, we have to focus on systems, obviously. But what we are building starts with how we are literally treating people on an everyday basis. And if we are not doing that well, then we are not going to be able to get to a liberated future.
Agreed. Dr. Berry?
I really think that part of what we're trying to, part of what she's trying to get at is the fact that, we as human beings all have a connective nature, and it's really important that, we pay attention to images and representations in the media. I mean, that's one of the things I do a lot of work in, is images of African Americans in the media and messages about African Americans in the media. Just understanding that these representations influence who we can become, who we think about becoming, how we interact in our society. And so her work as media really helps to give us representations that enable kind of a thought process in relation to not just survival, which is, like I said, I think one of her major themes in all of her books, but also issues of activism, issues of understanding identity, issues of really trying to pay attention to who we are and who we want to become. And so I think that she does a great job of really trying to help us figure out who we are. And sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's harder to think about these issues in relation one-on-one, whereas if you're thinking about them in relation to an immortal empath, somebody who has telekinetic, yeah, or an alien, or if it's something different, a lot of times when you look at these movies and books and other kinds of stories, where there's the other, but the other is not human, or the other is not normal. You can tell the story and people might pay more attention. It may not be as, I should say, it may not be as conflictive or confronting. You may not be as confronting to the person if you're saying, look at how these aliens are being treated, or look at how these people are being treated. Even though it's similar to what's happening in the real world, these people, the immigrants are being treated like this by ICE, but maybe you write that as aliens being treated in a certain way. We get the same message, but technically we don't, and I went off on a tangent, but anyway, technically, we get the same message, but it's not as confrontative as it is if you say, look at how ICE is treating these immigrants. That's what came in my head.
I wanted to, I apologize, Ms. Henry. I want to jump to a different question, because I think this ties to the question that I wanted to ask. So all of us on the panel, I mean, we have one important thing in common, apart from being wonderful human beings, loving, happy. But we are all teachers. We're all educators. We've all been educators for a long time. And I think definitely at the heart of ensuring that people are able to make those connections between what Octavia E. Butler writes about and society, and being able to use that either as a roadmap or a guide or as a means of cultivating the empathy that is necessary to push our society into the future. to be blunt, someone's going to have to teach us how to do it. Someone's going to have to teach people how to do it. We are all teachers. We are all, all of us here on this panel, we're all teachers. We're all people that are familiar with Butler's work. So I suppose, how do we see Butler specifically employing or specifically describing the role education plays in creating those futures? And maybe just for fun, if we're still actively teaching, how are we using those strategies ourselves? How did we use them in the past in our classrooms? Hopefully that's not too pedagogical a question, but it's on my mind right now. Ms. Henry, if you'd like to answer that first, I know I kind of cut you off last time.
That's
so.
okay. That's okay. I was looking at the other question, but that's okay.
Oh yeah, no, I apologize. It's just you got me thinking about education. So
Okay. I mean, yeah. I do want to say one thing in regard to the other question, is that I think Octavia was trying to also make sure that Black women were going to find a way to maintain their own body autonomy. In so many ways, the characters, Dana, who is the person who goes back in time, and she meets her relative, they're constantly squabbling all the time. But in that squabbling, they recognize actually that they love each other. They also understand they have to face, as women, a lot of brutality and a lot of dehumanization. And they endure a lot in order to resist that extreme. In order to maintain their autonomy, they do certain things to not give up what they believe are their true selves. And in doing so, Alice, she resorts to suicide. She would rather die than submit herself again to a man who she believes has sold her children. And then Dana, on the other side, she sees that no matter what she has tried to do to help Rufus, he still is as cunning as ever and was willing to rape her. And she winds up, she stabs him because she was not going to submit herself again to him. So I just want to make sure that, as Black women during that time, they took a stand at various times to maintain what it means to maintain their own integrity. In regard to the teaching thing. Well, throughout the book, Kindred, Dana and her husband, who goes back in time at one point with her, they are teaching the kids on the plantation. And the kids enjoy learning to read. So all the kids on that particular plantation, Nigel learns to read, and in some ways he teaches some of the other people on the plantation to read, and then Dana reads aloud to Rufus, who is the Rufus' mother, So there's always a teaching process constantly going on under the radar, because the main owner of the plantation, he doesn't really want them to really learn how to read. But it doesn't matter, because the love of education, those people, the enslaved people, wanted to learn how to read. And Dana and her husband, they found that opportunity to make sure people were learning how to read.
Thank you.
Can I jump in?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think this idea of education is so important, and it's foundational to Octavia E. Butler's very work. so many people, as was mentioned with her, referencing the leader in Parable of the Talents, who is frighteningly reminiscent of what we're living through right now. People really talk about her work as prophetic, as foretelling the future, and I think it does because she studied, and she said that very clearly, especially with Parable of the Sower. But for everything, every piece she wrote, she studied so deeply, and she said that I studied what was happening around the world with all of these pieces, as was listed out earlier, with climate change, with privatization, on and on and on. And I extrapolated, if we continue on the path as we have been, where will we go, right? So her work that is seen as a prophecy in many ways is directly coming out of education. And she is taking in everything here and then, projecting it into the future if things don't change, which, unfortunately, we're much closer now than we were before to those realities. But I think it's really important why education is important. So all of Octavia's work is about, in many ways, raising this information, this clarion call, so we can do differently, right? That all of her stories are rooted around both survival and change, and controlling that change, and being able to make something better. Octavia, again, was saying, you can make things better. And I think, that is so clear in all of her books, Lilith's Brood, The Parable, Duology, on and on. So the point of education is to do something, and is to make the world better. And I think that is foundationally how Black people have always engaged in education. As you're saying, thinking about Frederick Douglass's autobiography when he was enslaved and what it took for him to learn to read. Octavia read that. She is rooting in that history, and also saying, we have a responsibility, just as they did to us. We have a responsibility to those who come after us.
Yeah, in a couple of interviews I read with her, she's very concerned about public education. She's very concerned about the privatization of our society, specifically how it was impacting public education. She talks about how without public education, she would not have been able to have the vision and the growth and the capacity to write and kind of develop herself as the person she was. And so her issue in relation to public education was very prominent. And so I do believe that that's one of the things she does very, very well in her books, is educate people as to how we should think about who we are and where we're going and what do we want to see in the future. I mean, I think those are all areas that she very effectively relates in her work.
And the other thing is when you read in her in the biography, it talks about how she was so in sync with public libraries. Mm-hmm. She made sure that wherever she went, she was hooking up with all kinds of library work, and she did She did not drive a car. She always rode on a bus or she flew. But she made sure wherever she was going and researching, she was going to libraries.
As a master's in library and information science candidate myself, I appreciate that. Well, seeing what we're focusing on with respect to the questions, I do want to move to kind of the last of the major questions that I know we've discussed before the panel, and I want to talk about the notion of better worlds being possible. That's something that's come up in conversation throughout this panel. But a recurring theme in Butler's work is the notion that better worlds are possible. And I don't mean that in the Wayland-Yutani Building Better World sense, like the forced construction way, but, oh yeah, that's right. There is that in-joke, sorry. Professor Marisha and I have a long-running, like decade-long disagreement about the Alien movies. But,
You're the best nerd, Daryl.
I wouldn't go
In
that
addition
far.
to all your other amazing things.
Well, thank you. But, you know, but Octavia E. Butler really focuses on the notion that a better world is possible. Building better worlds is possible. And so, you know, especially after reading Butler, and at least in my case, after rereading Kindred and Parable of the Sower, what do we think as a panel that Octavia Butler wanted readers to do? Not just to think or to feel, but how do you feel that Octavia E. Butler wanted us to create a better world, the better world that is possible? I'll start with Dr. Berry, because I've been
Well, one of the things that came to mind as I was doing some of my reading on Octavia Butler was just this whole idea. You had mentioned in one of your questions you sent us about just black women and the power of black women. And my current anthology that's out talks about black women, the Black Superwoman stereotype and mental health, power and pain, just kind of thinking about, you know, how we have this need to fix it, how we have this need to be better, how we feel like we have to help, how we have to understand. And I think part of that comes from, you know, her, or is connected to her in a way that, or her writing in a way that black women throughout all of her novels are constantly striving. And I don't know if they, in a number of them, I don't know if they ever actually reached that. My co-panelist said that earlier, if they ever reached that higher plane. You know, it's just a constant struggle and a constant fight to create a life that's better, a life that's, you know, happier, a life that fits into where you are and that you can live and be at least comfortable, if not happy. So I think one of the things for me is just thinking, like I said, as I was looking at some of her work and some of the people who talk about her work, is that Black Superwoman stereotype that is common in a lot of work of African American novelists, and you can find it in her work as well. And then, you know, you think about it in reality of how we, as African American women, have a tendency to kind of step out there and feel like we have to do it all and we have to be it all and we have to, you know, take on that role, and it impacts us from a variety of different ways. So I don't know if I actually believe, or at least if I actually feel like her characters or her stories reach that higher plane. It's a constant struggle. It's constant striving in relation to what I remember. And I didn't go back and read all of her books. I just read a few of them. But I've read all of them over the years, but I read a couple in prepared for this this panel.
Clarifying question, Dr. Berry. I think I know you and I at the very least, I know that we both agree in the sense that, that black women in particular, both in the real world and in perhaps a more acute or specific way in Butler's novels, black women often have to be hyper aware that they are the foundation, but also the constant rebuilding, the buttress that holds everything upright, and constantly having to move through, whether it be through space or through time, to constantly hold things up. Now, just as a clarifying question, are you indicating, or like, where are you showing, or do you feel as if Butler not showing any characters actually sort of reaching that place? Do you think that's is that more of an aspirational thing to keep trying, or is that a maybe, if not Afro-pessimistic, but Afro-cynical notion on what society will allow black women to accomplish?
Well, I mean, I think it's kind of what my co-panelists talked about is the fact that, do we ever really reach can we ever really reach that space that we're talking about, where everything is perfect, everything is good, everything is the way we want it to be? I don't know if we ever reach that, and so I don't think that's where she was going with her work. I think she really was trying to help people understand that, you know, you can continue to build and grow and do, but there's going to be this constant, I mean, that's one of the things she talks about when she talks about change and consequences. There's just this constant, you know, struggle that we're all involved in, and that's her characters. Her characters are involved in a constant struggle, no matter where they find themselves in whatever story she's writing. And I think that helps to show us that you can't give up, you gotta fight, you gotta move, you gotta do what you need to do. And I think that her stories tell us that, you know, we are dynamic, but we can't, I tell people all the time, I'm a perfectionist who's not perfect. And so it's that kind of mentality. It's kind of like, you know, you're constantly trying, but, you know, just understand you may not get there, but you can make it better.
Perfectionism breeds not perfection, but a healthy pursuit of perfection.
Sometimes it's unhealthy.
Well, that's true. That is very true. I apologize for the clarifying question. I wanted to, you know, I wanted to make sure that I got that out. Ms. Henry.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Are you going to get to her ability of hyper emotion to feel what other people are feeling? Is that part of it? Is she trying to symbolize something about the African American women's?
Well, I think, you know, oh, I'm so sorry.
So, yeah, I'm just talking about, in the book, Parable of the Sower, the character has this ability to feel what other people feel. And that plays into the plight of the African American women.
Well, I cannot think of a better time to turn the panel over to audience questions. Professor Marisha, the question that was asked is Butler, is part of what Butler's emphasis on or means of conveying the black woman experience part of, or is her use of empathy and is her use of emotion and feeling part of the experience of the black American woman? Is that an effective condensation of your question? I apologize. Professor Marisha, did you want to answer that? We didn't get to your answer for the last question, so.
Sure. I mean, I think the presence of empathy is such a foundational part of every single piece of Octavia E. Butler's writing. I think one thing and it connects is there's an amazing black woman scholar, Ayanna Jameson, who's been doing a lot of research into Octavia E. Butler's, specifically her papers that are in the Huntington Library. And Octavia wrote like full drafts, many different versions for each book. And so one thing Ayanna was saying when she gave a presentation was that most of the times the ending Octavia originally wrote was much more pessimistic than the ending that is published. And she's talked about that. She said she was a mass of contradictions, just like was said, the perfectionist who isn't perfect. She said she was a pessimist who was eternally optimistic. And so it's like she had to, you know, to exercise that pessimism by writing it out. She had to write the worst possible scenario before she could come back and say, okay, you know, what are the possibilities here? And so I think that's an important part of her work that shows up, this tension between those two. And I think it's very, very clear in how she writes about empathy, because while empathy plays a role in all of her stories, it's almost always, I was going to say always, but you never say always, because then the person, almost always a forced empathy, right? It's not something people choose, it's something they're forced into. So the psychic connection, as was talked about with Kindred, between Dana and Rufus, she didn't choose that. That was forced upon her, and she had to deal with it. Parable of the Sower, Lauren Olamina, the main character, I think I was trying to listen, but was mentioned, she has a disease that allows her to physically feel what she thinks other people are feeling. That was forced upon her. The same thing, Lilith's brood, the aliens have a sort of shared telepathy that they force upon the humans. You know, it was already mentioned, pattern master. We could go through everything, right? So it's very clear Octavia is saying humans have the ability and capacity for great empathy, and that is a fundamental piece we need to change, to make change. And, you know, the pessimism of Octavia was thinking humans wouldn't choose to do that voluntarily. And so she felt it would have to be forced on us. And I think the fact, not obviously the ways, I don't think she was saying, you know, aliens are going to come and network us, our minds together, but the way she wrote it was being very clear. If we don't choose this, if we are to survive, it then has to be chosen for us, even against our will.
As for whether or not aliens are going to link our minds together, that depends on what you think Elon Musk is. Well, it had to happen at least once, folks. Well, I wanted to open up the panel to questions from the audience. I think, you know, thank you all as an audience for sitting and being very, very, you know, a wonderful audience for this particular panel. Thank you very much. So do we have any questions from the audience, any more questions from the audience for our panel about Octavia E. Butler's work, the panelists themselves? Up the front. Oh, wait for the microphone to come to you. It's okay, sorry, Professor E. Marisha needs it in order to hear it. So.
Okay. I don't think, is it on? Okay.
Yeah, it's on.
Well, thank you so much. This is so cool. I'm so happy to be here. And thank you guys so much. I'm not sure if I'm going to phrase this question correctly, but it kind of goes back to what you guys talked about on education, and all of you guys are educators, as well as like the idea of forcing empathy. In our current world, or in the U.S., where like the Department of Education is being dismantled, where things about diversity and true real history is being taken away, and history is being whitewashed, how do we get people to care, and how do we teach those people that are not part of marginalized communities that these are things that happened, and you know everyone needs to come together in order to fight them? And how do you teach those that are very, very privileged to learn to care about these things? And the reason I ask is because I am in a field in which it's very hard to make it into that field unless you come from privilege. And it's very obvious in how we are taught. I'm in medicine, by the way, it's that. So it's very obvious in the way that, you know, physicians at the hospital interact with their Black patients compared to their white patients. You can, even if these are the kindest people ever, you can start seeing distinctions in how patients of certain color, patients of certain sexualities are treated. And in school, there is no emphasis on recognizing that medicine itself and really all of history is built on the backs of people who didn't consent. And it's never taught. And those that are privileged don't care enough to learn.
And those of us that are teaching it aren't allowed to teach it.
Yes, and so how do you do that, especially for the two panelists who are professors to older students like myself, where we have now grown up in a privileged society, and so our minds are kind of like, well, this is what happened and I'm going to stick with it, and you have all this confirmation bias, and you can just go and look something up that agrees with you, and you don't have that young mind that can be molded. Like, how can you change the minds of people that have so much privilege? That's a very long question, but
it's okay. Thank you for asking it. We appreciate it.
I'm currently teaching a class called Writing for Social Change. And the key component of that class is to help my students understand that you may not be able to change the world, but you can reach out and change one person. And that really is kind of what I'm trying to get, what I would suggest is that you may not be able to reach everybody, but you need to speak up and reach that person next to you. And then maybe somebody else who's next to you. And then maybe that person will reach out and touch somebody else. I just think it's important. A lot of times these issues, especially in our society today, for me and a lot of people, they seem overwhelming. There's just so much going on. There's so many issues. There's so much of civil rights that's being rolled back and so many changes that's going on. And it's just like, oh my goodness, you know, what can we do? And, you know, I can't fix everything, but you know what? I can talk to somebody, I can help somebody in my class better understand what the situation is. I can help somebody, you know, in my, next to me who's in a certain situation better think about things from a different perspective. I think that's really the best we can do. I mean, I would love to get out there and have my voice be heard by everybody. I'd love to go viral on TikTok, even though my daughter's trying to teach me TikTok. I'm still a dinosaur when it comes to social media, but I feel like I do feel comfortable and I feel good when I can reach one person, when I can get one person to understand, you know, the way you explain that is problematic because, you know, the way you treated that person is a problem because. I actually have a student who, he and I are very close, and he's a senior, and he just sent me a text and said he was walking down the street going to get some chicken at Cane's. He's an African-American student, and he said, white male, walked past him and said, "What's up, nigga?" I mean, this was like 5 days ago. So again, just understanding that what's going on in our society, it's not new, and it's something that we're going to have to readdress. We're going to have to, you know, get out there and continue to struggle, continue to resist, but you may not be able to help everybody. But if you are empathetic and you can touch somebody else and help them be empathetic, then maybe you can pass it on. That's what I tell my students in my class. Yeah.
So that's like the fractal.
Oh, no, it's okay, the microphone's coming your way, that's all. If you have another question while someone is asking a question, feel free to raise your hand so that I know where to get and send the microphone next, okay?
So that's
Thank
like
you.
the fraxel that you were describing, right? Like the honeycomb. Tiny changes, one tiny piece of a big whole, repetition, patterns. It also brings to mind that book, Atomic Habits, like tiny changes or really incremental change in your own behaviors or your own patterns add up. So I think it's a really good paradigm for hope because,
Absolutely.
you know, you can get pretty overwhelmed pretty quickly. So if you can,
Absolutely.
and so that's also, I think, when you were asking that question, I was thinking for the panel, if you were teaching a group of white, very blue collar, or perhaps not even so, high school students or middle school students, how would you engage them and try and get them connected and want to read some of Octavia Butler's books? Like, what would you say to that demographic to try and convince them that this is literature they might want to read?
Professor Marisha, I know you have some experience teaching incarcerated people, so I think that also would be, I think that's a question, you know, that I might maybe redirect towards you in the sense that you are accustomed to working with students that may be coming from a perspective that may be predisposed to view certain issues a certain way. How, in your experience, do you end up, you know, using that, or how do you end up working with that?
I appreciate you bringing that in. I don't know that it's relevant to this question. The students that I've encountered teaching at the prison overwhelmingly are hungry for education information when you were talking about the young enslaved Black folks in Kindred really wanting to read. That's been my experience of folks being so hungry for education, for spaces to be able to explore, and for knowledge, information, and history. So I don't know that I think it's super relevant, but I do have a question or an answer, and it ties. I forgot to finish my last point because I was trying to like combine two, and then I left off the. So around empathy, Octavia E. Butler's, the heart of empathy is Black women, right? In her stories, it's always Black women who are the heart of it, and they choose to embrace that empathy, whether it's forced on them or not, and use it for good and use it to build a better world. There are people who do not do that. And so I think Octavia, in saying that some humans are going to have to be forced, I think she was specifically talking about people who have the most power and privilege and talking about white men. And I think, again and again in these stories, there are white men who choose to be able to be open to that and to change, to see others' humanity and therefore their own humanity and be part of that change. And there are some that are so deeply invested in their, white supremacist power and privilege that they refuse, and they're often at best left behind and at worst destroyed. And I think Kindred is a good example of that, right? Because Dana's husband, in that story, she's a Black woman, he's a white man. Rufus, who is, in the past, her ancestor, is a white man. So we have two examples of these white men. One of them chooses to connect, chooses to take in what is happening, take in something they never even necessarily understood, in the smallest way. And Rufus didn't, and Rufus is destroyed. And we can see that again and again and again in Lilith's Brood. I think very, very clearly in Fledgling, which is she called it her fun vampire book. I don't know.
Is there any other kind of vampire book, though, really?
No, I was going to say, I love Octavia's work. I recommend it. I read it all the time. I wouldn't be like, woo, this is a fun afternoon reading. Right? Like, it's heavy, it's intense. But again, I think it is really Black women saying, we are all connected. It is what it is. We can't change that. How do we come together to build something different? And again, there are people with power and privilege, often embodied by white men in the story, who say, yes, I want to be part of that change, and I know I need to make changes within myself to do that. And there are some who refuse, and they get destroyed. And so I think this idea of, I don't think we can change everyone's mind, and I don't think we need to change everyone's mind. I think that what we can do is offer education to folks, offer different framings, support them as long as they are trying to go on that journey. But if they're refusing to go on that journey, that's the reality, right? I'm teaching the civil rights movement class right now. 2/3 of Americans polled hated MLK, right? Now 96% of Americans polled love him. So I think it's important to recognize change has to happen, and change is happening, and it's being led by those folks who are most marginalized and oppressed. And we do not, cannot, and have not ever waited for the vast majority of, people who are not oppressed to decide, okay, yes, this is important. You have to move rooted in justice. And if people are interested, you create as many educational opportunities as possible. But I think there is an emphasis on educating people who are purposely ignorant, right? There's a difference between being ignorant, I didn't have this information, I never thought about this, I never encountered this, and people who work very hard not to know, so they do not have to make changes. There is nothing you can do for someone who is purposely ignorant. That's them, that's their journey. But for the vast, so many people who just haven't encountered it, and that's what I experience in the prison, that's what I most often experience in my classes. Folks are hungry for this information. They're like, wait, okay, back up. I need to understand this. But that's not going to be everyone, and it never has. And if we wait for that, we'll never make change.
And I think one of the things I said earlier about Octavia's books is the fact that using alternatives, like I said, aliens and time travel and all kinds of different ideas that are not the norm, like, this person deals with this person, but from a different perspective. I mean, she deals with a lot of the issues that we want people to better understand. She deals, like I said, with survival, identity, transformation, sexism, racism. I mean, she's dealing with those issues, but she's dealing with them from an alternative perspective, so that if you see the racism or the otherism, probably would be a better word, in relation to aliens, then a high school student might be able to say, oh, okay, and kind of connect with it and be willing to pay attention to it, because it's not personally, approaching them or conflicting with them. So I think that her books would be very good, most of her books would be very good to help students understand those issues, but not from a conflicting, although some of her books have been banned.
Yeah.
I don't know if all of them have, but I know some of them have
Give
been
it time.
banned.
Give it time.
Well, two of the books, The Parable of the Sower and The Parable of the Talents, in regard to young people, high school students, are now are graphic novels. So if you want to interest the youth, you can go that route, the graphic novel. I mean, they are really great, So
Kindred has been made into a television series.
Right,
about
so if you
4
want to
years.
go that route first.
Only one season, that's true. Yeah. So, we are butting up against a time constraint, so I know we have time for probably 2 more questions. We have a question right there in the corner, and then, actually, well, okay, we'll get to you later. Appreciate you.
It seems that Butler combined the Bible and because it is no book more science fiction than the Bible. Ezekiel saw the wheel, but she knew how to appeal to the science fiction. And right now we're in a science fiction era, because this is not the country I was born into. And it's people ignore science fiction at their own peril, because now I'm looking at Doctor Who, and I'm seeing what's happening to us. So that Butler was able to capture that. She didn't base so much on race as reality. So she's like an inclusive reader. You can read her, and you're reading yourself. You read a book, and the book is reading you, and it's a back and forth exchange. But she should be read, and she should be into the educational system. Because I first found out about Butler when I was in Fred Moten's class here, when he was teaching at the University of Iowa. And he put us on to that, and he put us on to, like, philosophy. Butler was a deep writer, but before her time, but that's how all great writers are before their times, when you study about what's really going on. So it's like we're caught in this thing where we can't move. We don't know what to do. We can't go left. We can't go right. We're just standing still like a deer with its head in the headlights. So Butler is a good cure, or could add to the cure, to what can we do?
Thank you. For the record, Fred Moten and I are not related. Same last name, but not related. I believe we had one last question.
I was, to the point about empathy, I was just going to lift up the work of another community member and librarian, Jade Davis, who has a book called The Other Side of Empathy, where she's just thinking really carefully about empathy and the ways it can neutralize or weaponize sentiment, and how it can be a poor, Ruha Benjamin called it a poor placeholder for mutual recognition and social liberation. And it was just to offer that up as another resource for thinking about empathy from somebody else in the community.
And before we close, I'd like to, I do have some bookmarks for my new anthology, The Black Superwoman in Mental Health, Power, and Pain. This month, they're actually giving a 30% discount. So if you are interested, please grab a bookmark. And please look at my editorial that's in the Press Citizen today. Right. I'm really talking about the hypocrisy of the University of Iowa creating an intellectual freedom center, and at the same time taking away the majors of African American studies and gender and women's and sexuality studies, which is so trifling.
Well, lest we be held intellectually captive by thinking about other people.
Right.
I guess I would like to give one last question, just to the panel. For our panelists that are working on things, what are you working on right now? Are there are there other things? Are there things that you kind of jumped the gun, Dr. Barry? But what should we be looking out for from you? Yes, that's pretty much what I wanted to offer. I wanted to ask the panelists.
You want to start with our?
Yes, Professor Mireche, from the future.
Oh, what am I working on? Oh, surviving. Yeah, I think. I'm working on a couple books, but nowhere near. I'm always so impressed and amazed as folks put out books, and it is. I now understand the process, the painful process.
As someone currently writing a dissertation, I understand that. Well, did we have any final remarks from the panel, just in general?
I would just, since you talk about where we work.
Absolutely, that's what I was going to ask.
I and a group of community people, we're working on writing curriculum for Freedom School. We plan on having a Freedom School this summer.
Fantastic. Well, I would like to thank our wonderful panel. Please, a round of applause for our wonderful panelists. A round of applause for University of Iowa Library's special collections here. A round of applause for everyone, Iowa Senior Center, everyone that has put on this wonderful festival. Thank you very much. And because I am an elementary school teacher at heart, a round of applause for you all for showing up. Thank you all very, very much for showing up. We greatly appreciate it.
A round of applause for our amazing moderator.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Thank you all very much. You all have a wonderful, blessed weekend. Take care of yourselves. Be kind to one another. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Walida. You are so awesome. It's always good to see you.
Oh, thank you so much. This was wonderful. Thank you for including me. And loved getting to hear you.
Thank you. And you hang in there.
Thank you. All right. Have a good one.